Most recent weapon added into the game is Rhea's weapon at this point in time, and with her serving as the secondary synergy enabler to bleed, she is of course in very, very high demand. She was heavily anticipated, and her weapon realistically is probably about as good as we could have expected it to have been released as. So, as always with these, I've made a private Discord channel going over all the iterations of our weapon. I have them all listed out here, but the easiest way to show this is on this chart. You'll see here her base 4-star ability. It will be the critical strike triggered after the front row does 20 normal attacks. That includes Sonara extra normal attacks also. That crit will have damage coefficient of 120%, so 20% higher than normal. And Rhea will just have the passive functionality of when the critical strike is done, that will inflict bleed on the target. This can be procced through other means like John as a passive effect, but she will of course proc it herself through her own ability as well, which will be the primary focus of this weapon, and all its stars will throw out. So when you unlock the weapon to base, the only thing that will change is it will adjust the amount of normal attacks required to trigger this crit, and through that crit a bleed as well. So that's something that has to be noted of this, if you haven't realized it already, is you're not looking for the crits necessarily, it's the bleeds that come from the crits. And as I list down here, the crit coefficient indirectly is also the bleed coefficient, because bleed will deal 20% of the damage of the critical strike every second across 5 seconds. So it does 100% of that critical strike's damage just as a damage over time effect. So the harder you crit, the more damage your bleed that you're applying will do as well. And that will be important when you start getting to 1, 2, and 3 stars, where they increase the crit coefficient. So you'll be critting harder. That will do more damage by itself, but you'll also be applying bigger bleeds as well. So you'll effectively sort of be doubling up in your damage sources from this increased damage coefficient. The amount of normal attacks required to trigger a crit will remain static at 15 all the way up to 4 stars, where it will then drop down to 10. So it will half the time, or half the amount of normal attacks required to trigger a crit and therefore a bleed compared to her base 4-star, which is a very big increase, particularly when you then consider that the crits are bigger and the bleeds are bigger, and you're effectively applying them twice as much as well. I've done the maths on this. This disclaimer is pretty important. This and everything from here down is very specific to the formation I'm using here. There is no bleed dragon skill. There is no ship castle skin that increases bleed damage or anything like that. So don't take the percentages I list below here as gospel. These, however, are accurate regardless. If you're sort of confused by these maths, I can post it in the comments if you want. The way I found these was I used 300 normal attacks as a baseline. You will get that at a round base Sonara weapon with a bleed synergy lineup. So I divided 300 by the amount of normals required, and then multiplied that up by the crit coefficient, and then just found the percentage increase from that totaled up number compared to her base 4-star ability. So if we're taking her base 4-star as doing 100% damage, that's just the baseline. We'll then go to 125% damage from Rhea's 4-star awakening ability alone at the base weapon, then 144%, 156%, 167%, and then the jump from 3 to 4 stars is very, very big. The biggest jump of all. It's bigger than the jump from no weapon to 3-star weapon, actually. The jump from 3-star to 4-star weapon, because you're effectively double dipping, where you're getting that jump in more applied bleeds and crits, and the bleeds and crits are also hitting harder. Then the question is, how relevant is this increase? So I've done some tests against rebel groups. I did 3 hits with and without base Rhea weapon, just to average out the Sonara RNG effectively. Without Rhea weapon, Rhea was about 7.5% of my total damage here, so that's Commander Awakening damage. Then divided by the actual death count of the enemy. So it's 7.5% without. I have her weapon at base, so I tested it with the weapon just to compare and make sure this correlates at least closely enough to assume it's accurate in practice. The total damage number increases go up a bit more than you would expect if you just directly multiply them up from these. That's because there's 5 infantry base attack on this, plus the actual infantry attack and whatnot on it as well. But when comparing it to the total damage, it goes from 7.5% to about 9.75%. And that's a 130% increase. It was 125%, remember, from this jump, theoretically. And when you consider Sonara RNG, but also something like the dragon damage here just being diluted in its total percentage because the normal attack and bleed damage goes up with the base attack, whereas the dragon damage doesn't. It correlates pretty much perfectly. And I'm pretty sure because of that, we can assume this is entirely accurate. So if we use that and multiply it up, a weapon at 4-star would jump Rhea's awakening damage from about 7.5% of your total damage to almost 20% of your damage, which is a huge increase. Normally, to have that much relevance from bleed damage, you really need 4-star John. Otherwise, you just can't get enough bleeds for it to be relevant at all. Now, for more mid-spending players, that makes bleed a bit more attainable to be a competitive synergy. And of course, you can then double dip with her weapon at 4-star and John, and then you can get the bleed damage increased dragon skill, you can get the castle skin that increases bleed damage, and really exaggerate how much damage you're getting from bleed compared to before. So all in all, this is honestly one of the best weapons in the game, I think, particularly considering its price point. So it's the exact same pack progression as the likes of Salma, Annie, Julian, Kevin. It'll be 100 black diamonds for 5 fragments, then 200 for 10 fragments. You can have to buy that 3 times, and then it'll be 500 black diamonds for 25 fragments, and then 1,000 black diamonds for 40 fragments. And you can buy that up to 6 times. Coupons will work on it, but whilst it is still quite expensive, of course, if you want to continually level it, for the effect you're going to be getting from that jump from 3 to 4 stars, considering the stat increases you'll get from the infantry attack, the 5k army size at 4 stars as well. This jump is so big compared to other weapons and other synergies, at least. This weapon really is good. I don't think I need to overly sell it because Rhea is mandatory in bleed builds anyway, so it's just sort of an auto buy if you're building into this. But just as the mathematical justification, here it is. The one note I would say is I would expect at the time of recording, Lair of the Flames will be on the 6th, so in about a week from now. I think Daenerys weapon will be introduced in that Lair of the Flames, and whilst this is quite high budget meta talk, if you're thinking of investing all the way to 4 stars because you think it's so good, I would consider the risk that there may be a bit of a meta shift away from bleed because the disarms from Daenerys' weapon are so strong, and she may well end up being very prominent because of how good the tripling of dragon damage is at just the base of the weapon. And if everyone has disarm effects, even all the weakness players you run into, you could end up regretting chunking that much of your budget into this weapon if you want to flex to a different synergy type, potentially. I guess that goes for a lot of high budget spending in this game, but the timing isn't necessarily ideal, in my opinion. We're already seeing a bit of a shift to more female cav being ran. That could potentially lead to a bit more spear weakness being ran. Both of those can use Daenerys with weapon. So if you're in one of these like top 10, 20 UC alliances and you run into a lot of these players, I would at least consider the risk because you may want a bit more flexibility with what you're investing in, just in case. And the last note is currently scheduled to be installed Wednesdays with the new shop rotation, and the coupons actually align pretty well with our weapon, actually. I think Wednesday is the best day to buy stuff with the availability of coupons, which can pre-buy. Monday coupons can last into Wednesday as well. So this weapon really does have a lot of stuff going for it. I would heavily advise, at minimum, getting it to to base and unlocked if you are running the bleed synergy in any way, shape, or form.